The first snow arrived early that year, drifting down from a gray sky like powdered glass, cold and sharp, settling over the mountains of Montana in a way that made everything look peaceful yet terrifying at the same time. And inside that frozen world stood a small weathered cabin owned by a veteran named Daniel Carter, a man who had spent years fighting battles overseas only to come home to a quieter, but equally difficult war against loneliness, grief, and the memories he carried like invisible scars. And beside him through everything was his loyal German shepherd, Max, whose calm eyes and steady presence were the only things keeping Daniel grounded as the seasons changed and the winter storms grew more violent. And it was on one brutally cold night, when the wind screamed like something alive and the temperature dropped so low it felt like the world might crack open, that Daniel realized his barn, where he kept feed, emergency supplies, and his only source of stored heat, was too far from the cabin to reach safely in deep snow, a distance that could easily cost his life if a blizzard hit while he was outside. And from that terrifying realization came the idea that nobody in the valley understood at first. The idea to build a tunnel under the snow from the cabin to the barn before winter settled in for good. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and people rebuilding their lives in their quiet, brave ways, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe so more stories like this can reach others who need them. Daniel worked like a man possessed, not because he wanted attention or applause. He wanted survival, dignity, and a way to live for the lonely, cold months ahead. And Max worked beside him every day, pushing dirt with his paws, crawling through narrow spaces, and alerting Daniel whenever the ground became unstable or a tunnel wall needed reinforcement. And although the settlers around him, who lived in warmer, newer houses closer to the main road, laughed at the sight of a 53-year-old veteran digging holes like a desperate animal, Daniel didn't let their judgment stop him because he knew they had never spent nights in freezing desert temperatures or carried wounded friends across foreign soil, and they had never understood what it meant to prepare for danger before it arrived. And so he kept digging, shaping the tunnel with wooden beams he scavenged from old sheds, lining the floor with gravel, building vents so air could circulate, and slowly connecting his small cabin to his barn with a narrow but strong underground passageway that ran almost 80 feet through the earth like a secret artery of hope. And during those long days, Max was always ahead of him, sniffing, listening, and guiding with the quiet intelligence that made him feel like more than a dog, more like a guardian sent to keep Daniel alive. When the first real storm arrived, it came so suddenly that the sky went black in the middle of the afternoon and the snow fell in heavy sheets, hammering the cabin walls with sound like fists pounding wood. And outside, the wind tore across the valley hard enough to blow fences down and lift loose shingles from roofs. And the settlers who had mocked Daniel earlier were suddenly terrified, scrambling to bring animals inside, hauling supplies through knee-deep drifts of snow, realizing, too, late how unprepared they were as the temperature crashed below zero and everything began to freeze. And meanwhile, Daniel, sitting inside his little cabin with Max's feet, felt the strange comfort of knowing he had prepared for this moment, and when he needed to reach the barn for food or tools, he simply opened a small wooden hatch near his stove, climbed down into the tunnel, and walked beneath the earth with a lantern held out in front of him while the storm raged overhead like a monster he no longer feared because he had built his own safe world below it. The tunnel worked better than Daniel ever imagined. It stayed warm enough underground that ice never formed on the walls, and every time he walked it with Max trotting happily beside him, he felt a deep gratitude that pushed back the dark memories inside his mind. And by the third day of the storm, when the valley was completely cut off by snowdrifts taller than trucks, the settlers began to suffer, their homes cold, their barns unreachable, their livestock starving, and their food supplies running dangerously low because nobody had expected the early blizzard to trap them so completely. And it was only then that they remembered the man they had mocked, the man who had quietly built what looked like a pointless tunnel all summer long while they teased him from their porch rails and barbecues. And they realized he was the only person in the valley with full access to his supplies, his animals, and his firewood without ever stepping outside into the deadly cold. On the fourth day, just before dusk, when the storm's fury briefly weakened, a settler family, John and Melissa Reeves and their 2 children, attempted to walk to town for help, but halfway down the valley path, John collapsed from exhaustion, and Melissa struggled to pull him through the drift, crying, panicking, and calling for help even though the wind swallowed her voice. But Max heard her faint cry through the storm, lifting his head, ears sharp, tail stiff, and Daniel recognized that alert. Immediately, pulling on his boots, grabbing his lantern, and following Max into the bitter white world outside, the two of them moving through the snow like shadows with Max leading the way, guiding Daniel to the Reeves family, who were moments away from freezing, and Daniel dragged them back toward his cabin one by one while Max circled them to keep them warm and moving, and by the time they reached shelter, all four of the Reeves family were trembling but alive, huddled near Daniel's fire, while Melissa cried with relief and John whispered a shaky apology for ever mocking him. Over the next 2 days, more settlers came, some carried by Daniel and Max, others stumbling through the snow on their own, and eventually nearly every family in the valley ended up inside Daniel's cabin and barn, kept alive because a veteran who lived quietly and prepared carefully had built something that all dismissed as foolish, and Daniel didn't turn anyone away, not because he forgot their disrespect, but because he knew what it meant to feel helpless and cold and scared in his. Compassion rose stronger than his pride, and as the storm finally ended, revealing a valley buried under a blanket of white as far as the eye could see, everyone realized the truth. Daniel and Max had saved the entire valley simply by planning ahead and trusting their instincts when nobody else did, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something warm and unfamiliar filling the empty places in his heart. Belonging, respect, and a sense of purpose deeper than survival. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness and quiet courage, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more people can be inspired by true human strength. Before the ending, please comment below. Max was the real hero. When spring finally arrived and the snow melted into streams that ran brightly through fields turning green again, the settlers gathered at Daniel's cabin, not to laugh, not to judge, but to thank him and Max for their bravery, offering supplies, help, and friendship, and Daniel, who had once felt like a forgotten soldier living alone with only his dog for company, suddenly found himself part of community again, not because he sought recognition, but because his quiet actions had proven that. Courage didn't always look like battlefield heroism. Sometimes it looked like building a tunnel in the dirt when nobody understood why, trusting a loyal dog who never doubted him, and opening his door to people who once turned their backs. And as Daniel sat on his porch that evening with Max resting his head on his lap, he knew that winter had not just tested him. It had healed him, given him new purpose, and shown the valley that true heroes were often the ones who worked in silence, loved, without limits, and carried their battles privately while still choosing compassion every single day.